I uncovered sinister rules of survival as a night shift worker in a cursed diner in Pennsylvania. Jake's heart raced as he stepped through the diner's door, the bell above it chiming a hollow welcome. Shadows slinked along the cracked linoleum floor, and the flickering neon sign outside cast an ominous glow that barely broke the thick veil of night. He felt the weight of the diner's history, crumbling memories tucked between grease-stained booths that whispered tales of tragedy to anyone willing to listen. Was it true what they said about the diner being cursed? He shook his head, convincing himself that folklore was just a child's nightmare, a tale to scare kids into behaving. The night shift began in silence. Only a handful of late-night vultures lingered over coffee as thick as tar. The waitress was all eyes, her gaze heavy with long-held secrets as she haphazardly refilled coffee cups. Jake tried to banter but felt their wary glances jump through the air like knives, the laughter of distant patrons echoing in an unsettling melody. The gaunt figure of his boss, Crispin, leaned against the counter, a knowing smirk twisting his lips, filling Jake with a sense of unease. As he recounted dark tales of the diner's past accidents, disappearances, Jake laughed hollowly, though a chill skittered along his spine. The storm rolled in like a freight train, dark clouds swallowing the stars and unleashing a torrential downpour. Jake's anxiety spiked when he noticed Ethan had gone silent in the corner booth, his small frame lost in the faint glow of the overhead lights. Panic gripped him as he called out, his voice swallowed by the howling winds. The diner, once a quirky sanctuary, morphed into a twisted labyrinth. Shadows danced like specters and each booth seemed to close in around him, secrets hiding in dark corners. Ethan! He shouted, his heart thundering in his chest. Each step felt like wading through molasses, the air thick with foreboding. He quickly checked the restroom and the kitchen, but the child was nowhere to be found. As his panic morphed into dread, he stumbled across disturbing clues. An old photograph caught his eye, a smiling group of townsfolk, Crispin in the center, a rusted knife glinting in his hand. A newspaper clipping, faded and yellowed, detailed the haunting disappearances of children, one with striking similarities to Ethan, not just a child's game anymore. Distracted murmurs from the remaining customers intensified, they dropped fragmented words that sliced through Jake's thoughts. Ritual, sacrifice, hungry, they echoed like a morbid soundtrack. Their eyes darted around as if watching for something lurking just beyond reach. Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Jake's breath hitched as he noticed a strange figure huddled in a corner booth. The customer clutched a tattered book with ominous symbols, completely absorbed in an unsettling tale that felt all too familiar. The air thickened, and the flickering lights dimmed as if daring him to approach. Just as Jake mustered the courage to step closer, their eyes met. The smirk that curled across the stranger's face turned his blood to ice. "You should have never taken this job, Jake," they whispered, voice dripping with malice. "The rules demand sacrifices, and it's hungry tonight." Suddenly, the diner felt claustrophobic. The walls inched closer, shadows flickered, and a relentless fear clawed at him. A rush of adrenaline surged. He had to find Ethan. But was the boy still within these cursed walls? What fate awaited him? Jake clenched his jaw, the scent of burnt grease and desperation filling the air. How far was he willing to go to protect his son before the darkness claimed him too? The storm raged outside, but darkness crept in. Was it just the storm or something far worse? Panic clawed at Jake's throat as he turned on his heel, desperation sparking in his chest. The eyes in the diner followed him, hollow and cold, whispers weaving a tapestry of dread around him. He could feel the gaze of the strange customer burning into his back as he stumbled through the sea of booths, each one a dark secret waiting to swallow him whole. "Ethan!" His voice cracked like thunder through the thick air, echoing in the silence that seemed to suffocate the diner. He burst into the kitchen, slamming the swinging door so hard that it rattled on its hinges. The dull metallic sound grated against his raw nerves. The kitchen was deserted, save for the old refrigerator humming in an unsettling rhythm. The shadows crept along the countertops like hungry snakes. Jake's heart pounded in his ears as he checked behind the battered, grease-smeared equipment. The stillness felt unnatural, the ominous energy hung like a fog of inevitability. Suddenly, the staff door creaked. A shiver crawled up his spine, eyes darting to the approaching figure a cook Jake had seen only briefly, a wiry man with fingers too thin and a smile too wide. "They're waiting." The cook muttered, eyes gleaming with something dark and unsettling. "For who?" Jake's voice trembled. "Where's Ethan?" A gleam of teeth showed through the man's crazed grin. "Sacrifices are meant to be made. The diner, it's never satisfied." Before Jake could comprehend the meaning behind those chilling words, the raucous laughter erupted from the dining area, jerking him back to the main room. He rushed out, desperation fueling his frantic search. Each booth he passed felt like a looming threat, trapping him in a nightmare with no escape. It wasn't just his son he feared for, he was now afraid of the very diner itself, its walls whispering the horrors of all the lives consumed within them. "Ethan!" He cried again, dread kicking his heart into a frantic race. He had to find him. Sharp breaths caught in his throat as he passed the serpentine shadow of Crispin, who now loomed behind the counter, his lips curled into a sinister grin. "Jake," Crispin's voice slithered like smoke. "The boy is part of the plan now. You should embrace what comes next." With sudden clarity, a blade of reality sliced through Jake's confusion. The diner, those whispered secrets, they weren't folklore. This was all real. The tales he had dismissed, the ritual, the hunger suddenly weighed heavy on him like chains, heart pounding. Jake felt along the walls of the diner, a buried rage igniting within him. He yanked open the door to the basement, a dank, foreboding place he'd previously ignored. What lay beneath? Was Ethan hiding down there, or was it a trap waiting to ensnare him? A flicker of hope wrestled with the darkness in his heart. "Ethan!" He shouted one last time, the sound reverberating through the silence. The only answer was the echo of his own voice fading in the oppressive atmosphere. Steeling himself, he took a step into the darkness of the basement, the heavy door creaking shut behind him. A musty scent thickened the air, as shadows danced like phantoms on the walls. As he descended the narrow staircase, he heard the soft murmur of a child's voice faintly drifting from below. "Jake!" The ground trembled beneath him as if responding to his fear. He felt it in the very fabric of the diner, a sinister heartbeat pulsing through the air. The walls whispered secrets he wasn't ready to face, a promise of horrors that welcomed him deeper into the abyss. Before he could react, the lights flickered one last time, plunging him into darkness. What awaited him at the bottom? Was it his son, or something far more sinister? The darkness enveloped Jake like a suffocating blanket. He felt the cold concrete beneath his feet, an icy barrier separating him from whatever lay hidden in the gloom. His heart raced, each thump echoing in the silence that clawed at him fiercely, pushing him deeper into the black void. "Ethan," he whispered, more to reassure himself than anything else. His breath hung in the chilly air like a ghost, the words dissipating into the shadows around him. A muffled sound echoed back, a soft whimper that sent a jolt of ice through Jake. Was that his son? Or was it something else, a lure in the darkness? He strained his ears, the whisper was there again, more distinct this time, twisting around the throbbing fear in his gut. "Dad!" The word twisted in his chest, pulling him forward. He took a step, then another, navigating the maze of shadow with a cautious tread. The sound grew louder, guiding him further into the abyss. A muted light flickered in the distance, casting eerie shapes that danced on the walls. Then he heard it, the unmistakable laughter of children, mixed with cries that were fractured, frantic. The laughter twisted, distorted, till it became something torn apart, like it didn't belong to any child he knew. As Jake moved closer, the light flickered again, revealing the outlines of what appeared to be a long, narrow room. His pulse quickened. Was Ethan really here? He entered, and the dim light illuminated the room, a grim chamber stocked with forgotten relics. Stack upon stack of cracked plates and rusty utensils lined the walls. Dark spots marred the floor, creeping out like ink stains, soaking the history of the diner's failures. At the far end stood a rickety table, and atop it lay an old, crumpled photograph. Jake reached for it, heart hammering in his chest. The image showed a bunch of children from years past, smiling too wide. Their eyes, though, followed him, shadowed by something sinister. Jake! A voice pulled him back to reality. That was Ethan. He turned sharply, spotting a shadow crouched against the far wall. Ethan! He rushed forward, but before he could reach him, the lights flicked off, plunging him into a chilling silence. Stay back! Came the whisper, wild and afraid. Panic surged through Jake. They LLC you. Who? Jake shouted, fear rising. Ethan, what is happening? From the depths of the shadows emerged a grotesque figure. The cook from the diner, his thin fingers curled like talons, stepped into view. They want him, the cook crooned, a twisted smile growing larger, wider, grotesque. The diner always wants more. In that moment, Jake felt the walls breathing around him, impossibly alive, closing in. The air grew thick with the scent of rot, and whispers filled his ears. They promised despair and hopelessness. Ethan! He lunged forward, only to feel cold hands pull him back, sticky and thick, a grip that felt like tar. Don't fight it, the cook hissed. You can't escape what you're meant to become. Jake's mind raced. Thoughts ricocheted between saving his son and the horror creeping closer. The diner wanted sacrifices. Was he next? Would Ethan be snatched away, their lives consumed by this cursed place? Dad! Help! Ethan cried, his voice edged with fear. The realization slashed through Jake like a knife. He had to make a choice riddled with darkness. Would he step into the very depths of the diner's madness to save his son? As the light flickered back on, illuminating the horrid scene, Jake faced the grim truth. The diner wouldn't let them go easily. The rules were written in blood, and he was now ensnared in its ghastly game. With one last frantic cry, everything went dark again, and in that cold dark, Jake felt the sinister grip around his soul tighten, pulling him deeper. What awaited them at the end of this nightmarish reality? Would he bow to the diner's terrible rules, or fight against the encroaching insanity? The darkness came alive around Jake, stitching silence into a heavy blanket that smothered the remnants of his hope. Panic surged through him like a wild, racing river, but the cutting edge of fear was dulled by the urgent need to find Ethan. The boy's voice echoed faintly, as though trapped beyond a veil of malevolence, a chilling reminder that time was slipping. Ethan! Jake shouted into the void, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The very air felt electric, alive with a dread-inducing energy. Each heartbeat synchronized with the flickering light, an unsettling strobe against the smothering black. The grip tightened at his wrist, a vice that stung and burned. It was like being yanked back by the unseen, a fetid breath that welcomed him into the depths of despair. Don't fight it, whispered the cook, his breath a foul breeze that brought the reek of decay. You're too far gone. Let them take you. Fight? But how? The grotesque figure seemed to pulse with an insatiable hunger, the shadows surrounding it flickering as if alive, devouring whatever light remained. Jake felt the truth of those words seep into him, tempting him to surrender, to relinquish this battle he found himself in. But Ethan, his son, was still there. Somewhere, in that suffocating darkness, he remained. With a sudden surge of rage, Jake swung, tearing free from the cook's grasp. He stumbled forward, propelled by desperation. The dim light flickered again, and for a flash, he caught sight of Ethan, still crouched against the wall, fear shining in his eyes. Jake, please! Ethan cried. Jake lunged forward, but as he did, the brightness surged, blinding him momentarily. That was when the laughter returned, an echo of shattered childhood that clawed at his sanity. It was never-ending, reverberating off the walls, wrestling with his resolve. It twisted, a cacophony of mockery layered with an insidious undercurrent that gnawed at his mind. "Join us," the voices chimed, ghoulish and hypnotic, promising solace. "Become one with the diner." Then the light strung an unexpected path. A doorway cracked open, beckoning him. A glimmer of hope. Or another trap? Heart pounding, Jake hesitated. The whispers hummed louder, wailing now, caught in a frenzy as the walls pulsed, as if the diner itself were alive, writhing in agony. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was soft, trembling. "You have to come back." He swallowed hard, looking back at his son. The cook loomed closer, shadows shifting, revealing even more grotesque figures creeping around the edges of his vision. Each one bore a face twisted with despair, screaming without sound. Their eyes were a mirror reflecting Jake's own terror, a reflection of what he could become. Trapped in this hellish loop, with a primal yell, he dashed through the doorway, a desperate sprint into the unknown. What had he walked into? Was this passageway the answer? Or would it pull him further into the nightmare that had taken hold of the diner? As he stumbled into the next room, a chill washed over him, obscuring the warm light from within. Rooms felt alive, shifting. The laughter was gone, replaced with silence, weighed down by uncertainty. That feeling clawed at him. He was being watched from every crevice, every shadow. In the dead air, a flutter caught his eye. A door at the far end slowly creaked open, revealing nothing but blackness. He heard Ethan whimper softly, the sound a lifeline he so desperately needed. His instinct screamed run, but fear paralyzed him. Jake stood frozen, heart racing, caught between the urge to rescue his son and the panic tightening around him. What lay behind that door? Was it the way out, or a descent into deeper horror? Jake hesitated, and time stretched like taffy, the air thickening around him. "Dad!" Ethan cried. Jake stepped forward, the weight of sacrifice palpable. He needed to make a choice. Would he plunge into the darkness, or risk it all in that suffocating stillness? What awaited them on the other side? The shadows shifted, merging into a tableau of horrifying forms. Jake's grip tightened against the dread surrounding him, and he took a breath, the choice looming ahead, a final struggle that could either lead to salvation or plunge them both deeper into the fiery abyss. It was a step into the unknown. Would it save them or seal their fate? Jake pressed forward, heart hammering against his ribs like a wild beast desperate to escape its cage. The darkness loomed, thick and suffocating, swirling at the edges of his vision. In that moment of sheer desperation, he was merely a man, a father fighting to reclaim what was rightfully his. Ethan's whimpers echoed in his ears, guiding him, anchoring him to the reality outside this nightmare. "Stay close, buddy." He called into the void, though he knew Ethan couldn't reach him yet. The darkness swallowed his words almost as soon as they left his mouth. With a flick of courage, Jake stepped toward the door, heart racing as he crossed the threshold into uncertainty. On the other side, shadows danced menacingly, and the air thickened with the oppressive weight of dread. He could feel it, something sinister lurked just beyond the veil of darkness, waiting for an opening, a reason to strike. There was no going back now. With every step Jake took, the silence pressed in tighter, wrapping around him like a vice. Where was the laughter? Where were the nightmarish whispers? He strained to listen, but only the muffled sound of his own breath remained, heavy and labored. Suddenly, an unsettling vibration broke the silence, a low rumble followed by a sizzling crackle, like 1,000 tiny fires igniting in the unseen depths. Panic surged anew. What now? Jake's instincts screamed to turn and flee, but Ethan's voice persisted, a beacon amidst the encroaching darkness. "Dad!" That single word ignited a fire within him. Jake barreled deeper into the unknown, the vast space stretching out before him like an ocean of black. Images flickered behind closed eyelids, memories of laughter, warmth, Ethan's tiny fingers grasping his. But something else intertwined with those memories, a reminder that darkness wasn't merely an absence of light, it was alive, hungry, and patient. As he moved through the room, he caught glimpses of grotesque shapes shifting against the walls, their outlines too distorted to comprehend, too sinister to accept. Each movement sent shivers racing down his spine. Jake bit down hard on his lip. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Then came the sound. A scraping, clawing noise like nails against metal. Jake froze, breath sucked from his lungs. Ahead, a figure emerged from the shadows, deformities twisting its form into a mockery of humanity. Its eyes glowed, pinpricks of malice, and its mouth curled into a grin that promised torment. "Join us," it hissed, the words soaked in venom, pulling at the edges of his sanity. "No, stay away!" Jake yelled, feeling the weight of panic clawing at the back of his throat. He couldn't succumb. He wouldn't. But as the creature inched closer, the shadows behind it writhed, revealing more figures, faces twisted with agony and despair, mouths screaming, but no sound escaping. "Dad!" The primal cry pierced through the chaos, yanking Jake from the edge of panic. He turned, the urgency sharpening his focus. "I'm coming, Ethan." The figures hesitated, as if the name Ethan held power over them. That was the crack he needed. Without thinking, Jake burst toward the far wall, fueled by desperation, racing past the monstrous forms that flickered like terrible dreams, weaving in and out of sight. A burst of adrenaline propelled him onward, pushing aside the creeping dread. And then, through the wall of shadows, he glimpsed a flicker of light, the open door from which the whisper of his son's voice beckoned him. "Dad! Over here!" He surged forward, half running, half crouching, fear and determination colliding in a chaotic rush. As he neared the light, it swelled, promising salvation. But with each step, Jake felt a brutal force pulling him back, shadows grappling with his limbs, whispering dark promises into his ear. "Stay here, belong," they hissed, voices intertwined like a dark lullaby. With a roar, he flung himself through the threshold. The blinding light enveloped him, washing away the stench of decay and despair. For a breath, he felt safe. But then the air turned cold, bitter. He looked up, and instead of an escape, he found a room that was impossibly familiar. The diner, the same place he thought he had fled from. The walls pulsed, the lights flickered, and a sinister laugh erupted, echoing in cruel mockery. Jake's heart sank. Had he lost his way again? Was Ethan still trapped here in this hell? Then he spotted something moving beneath the table, a shadow darting. Jake crouched instinctively, leaning closer, desperately seeking the source of the movement. The shadows coiling around him felt more alive now than ever, almost forming a living tapestry of torment. "Dad!" Suddenly, the floor beneath him shifted, the entire diner groaning as though it were waking up. He could feel the vibrations coursing through his frame, dark and malevolent, clawing at his resolve. What did this place want? What had he unwittingly unleashed? As the shadows danced wickedly around him, Jake knew this was only the beginning. Each passing second bristled with dread, every heartbeat a countdown ticking toward a horrific revelation. In the depth of that looming darkness, with Ethan's cry echoing in his ears, Jake faced the one question that would haunt him for eternity: what will they ask of me next? Jake's breath caught in his throat as the diner's walls shuddered like a living thing. The unsettling groan echoed through the room, and he instinctively pressed his back against the cool surface of the counter, willing it to anchor him. Were the shadows now hungry for him? Desperate, he risked a glance beneath the table, but the only response was silence, the kind that wraps around you like a noose, slowly tightening. "Ethan!" He called again, his voice strained, breaking under the weight of creeping dread. The shadows around him thickened in response, writhing in anticipation, their whispers becoming a ghastly chorus, singing songs of despair and displacement. "Join us, lose yourself," they beckoned, their tones dripping like venom. Each word curled around him like smoke, clouding his mind. A sharp noise cut through the sinister murmurs, a chair clattering against the tiled floor as something lurched forward. Jake's heart pounded fiercely, the rhythmic thud echoing like a war drum. He held his breath and peered closer, eyes straining to dissect the writhing darkness. A shape, a visage mustered itself within the shadowy mass. A figure, vaguely human in outline but twisted, with angles that defied reason. It extended a hand, a grotesque mimicry of a welcoming gesture. "Come home," it crooned, the hollow tone underscoring a promise made of despair. Instinct surged within Jake, hot and relentless. "No." He pushed away from the counter, moving instinctively toward the soft warmth radiating from the hallway ahead. The light beckoned like a lighthouse to a ship lost at sea. Each step felt laborious, as if the very ground conspired against him, eager to wrap its tendrils around his ankles and drag him down. The shadows pulsed with renewed interest, slithering closer, whispering louder, thrumming with sinister glee. "Stay with us," they clawed at his thoughts, pulling viciously. But he would not bend. With a roar of defiance, Jake surged forward, his legs pumping like pistons, pushing extraneous thoughts aside. Escape was his only goal. "Dad!" Ethan's voice came again, sharper this time, a blade cutting through the malevolence. The sound filled Jake with an electric urgency. How could he let his son down again? They had come this far together, hadn't they? He broke through the dark barrier and stumbled into the heart of the diner. Light spilled from flickering bulbs, painting everything in harsh illumination. The tables were empty, but then a flicker caught his eye. A child's shadow. Jake's heart skipped. "Ethan!" he shouted, voice cracking. The shadow moved, darting toward the back of the diner, only to be swallowed again by darkness. A surge of alarming instinct drove Jake to pursue, his body moving autonomously, thoughts aligning with primal instincts to save his son. As he sprinted, the shadows hissed, angry notes slipping into the air. "He is ours. He can't be saved," they called, their resonance hitching with laughter that echoed in cruel waves. Jake reached the rear exit, cold metal pressing against his palm. The door shimmered, cloaked in a haze. Was it a way out or another trap? He hesitated, uncertainty bubbling within him. Faces twisted in agony emerged from the shadows, their mouths silent but painted with despair that clawed at him. The weight of hopelessness dripped through the air, a tangible fear. "What do you want from me?" Jake whispered, trying to meet their soulless gazes. As if responding, the figures erupted in a cacophony of shrieks, stretching outward as the shadows twisted and contorted around him. The screams echoed, mixing with the laughter, a terrible symphony of chaotic clamor that threatened to shatter his psyche. Then, a hand small and trembling wrapped around his wrist, yanking him back. Jake spun around and met his son's eyes, wide and terrified. "Dad, they don't want you here. They want me." Before he could respond, the shadows lunged, breaking through the moment of connection. They instinctively shaped into grotesque limbs aimed for Ethan. "No!" Jake roared, body surging with newfound strength, the desolation fueling his resolve. Get away from him. He threw himself between Ethan and the advancing shadows, but all around him, the diner began to collapse, the air crackling with dark energy, reality fraying like an old rope. But then came a chilling realization. What if this was their game? A choice lay before him. With a last desperate breath, Jake needed a plan. They could tear at him, but he wouldn't surrender. He had to take a stand. The shadows closed in, and a single question loomed larger than the terror. But would it be enough? Could he break their hold and save Ethan, or would he lose himself and his son forever? The shadows surged forward, their intentions clearer than anything he'd ever faced. Desperation filled him like gasoline, ready to ignite. The fight had only just begun. The air hung thick with palpable dread as the shadows converged, grotesque forms writhing with hungry intent. Jake's pulse quickened, each beat echoing terror through his body. He turned, instinctively shielding Ethan with his own frame, desperate to be the barrier between the horrors thrumming forward and the innocent warmth of his son. The atmosphere pulsed with an uncanny chill, a vicious pulse like a monster lurking, ready to swallow them whole. "Stay close to me," Jake said, his voice low as he felt the small hand tremble around his wrist. It was a lifeline, fragile but steady amid the storm of darkness. "Dad, I can feel them," Ethan whispered, his tiny voice frail against the uproar of the shadows. They're angry, they want to take me back. Fear clouded Ethan's eyes, and in that moment, Jake saw not just the terror of a child but the harsh realization that Ethan had become part of this wretched game. From the shadows, a voice hissed. You cannot protect him, Jake. We will have him. The words cut through the air, colder than the winter night outside. They coiled around Jake's throat as if the shadows themselves were tightening their grip. Not while I'm alive. Jake roared, the defiance surging through him, giving him strength. He didn't know how he would fight, he only knew that he must. His chest heaved as he stepped forward, dragging Ethan beside him. A cacophony of laughter erupted from the dark, mingling with wails that rewound time, sounding all too familiar, lost souls seeking anguish in a place long forsaken. The diner walls trembled with the collective torment. It was a symphony of despair that seemed to echo the memories of lost patrons, trapped forever in this limbo between light and darkness. Quick! Up there! Jake pointed toward the overhead rafters where faint, flickering bulbs still clung to life, casting momentary patches of light over the encroaching darkness. Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with fear but laced with trust as they moved together toward the back wall, footsteps quickening. Each step felt like they were treading on hot coals as the shadows hissed menacingly, snapping sharp tongues of darkness toward them. This way! Jake urged, leading his son toward the storage area of the diner. They burst through the narrow doorway, crashing into a space littered with unused furniture and forgotten dreams. The air was stale, but it was free of the consuming shadows. But how long would that last? Behind them, a wailing crescendo grew louder, spilling into the room from their previous sanctuary. Where do we go, Dad? Ethan gasped, eyes scanning the room frantically. Jake's mind raced, searching for any glimmer of hope, any exit that could grant them escape. Just above them, a window loomed, a high, dusty rectangle that seemed to beckon as much as it loomed. We have to climb up. Ethan nodded and scrambled after his father, both reaching for a pile of crates nearby, stacking them clumsily. As he hoisted Ethan onto his shoulders, the shadows shrieked, 1,000 echoes clamoring for the child, and Jake's heart thudded with mounting panic. Hurry, Ethan! Jake hissed. The shadows surged through the doorway, bodies shifting like ink spilling from an open bottle. Time felt suspended, the moment heavy with urgency. Ethan grasped the window ledge, the desperation potent in his small hands. I can't reach! He cried. Just lift! Jake shouted, urgency straining his voice. The moment stretched, shadows swarming the base of the crates as they trembled. With one final push, Ethan scrabbled up and over the ledge, disappearing into the thin mist of night outside. Jake turned, fire igniting in his chest as he faced the menacing flood of shadows now pouring through the opening. Desperation clawed at him. Was it too late for him? Suddenly, from the depth of the engulfing mass, disembodied faces formed, swirling sorrowful eyes leveling at him, begging, taunting. You belong to us. They shrieked, despair in their wails echoing against the diner walls. Jake felt the pull, something dark and seductive wrapping around his mind. With one last cry, he launched himself toward the window, skin prickling with cold as he leapt, but as his feet left the crate, a chilling realization gripped him. What if the shadows had more than just Ethan? What if the price he was about to pay was his own salvation or damnation? The plunge into darkness beckoned, an invitation he couldn't refuse and an outcome he couldn't foresee. Could he escape the void closing in around him, or would the diner's curse claim him too? The air outside felt different, thicker, almost suffocating. Jake landed hard on the damp ground, the jolt knocking the breath out of him. He rolled to the side, scrambling to his feet, just as the shadows burst from the diner, trailing after him like a ravenous beast. Ethan! Jake shouted, his voice raw, fear tightening around him. Panic clawed at his throat. Had his son really made it? As he turned, he could barely see the outline of the diner in the distance, the windows now mirroring a malevolent gaze, dark voids that seemed to consume light itself. A sudden chill swept through him. He could sense the presence of the shadows, slithering just beyond the edges of the faint streetlight glow that illuminated the pavement. They were closer than he thought, creeping ever nearer, their whispers clawing at his sanity. "Where are you?" he yelled, the terror in his heart intoxicating. He moved to the corner of the building, glancing over his shoulder. The shadows were writhing and twisting, taking form as they beckoned him back, their movements undulating like a nightmare made flesh. Then he heard a soft, desperate whimper drifting on the wind. It pulled at Jake's heart. "Dad?" Ethan's voice, shaking but familiar, cut through the swirling darkness. Relief flooded through Jake, pushing back against the growing fear. "Here. I'm here," he shouted, urgency propelling him toward the sound. But he had to tread carefully, those whispers were still lurking, still waiting. He rounded the corner to find Ethan crouched, small and trembling, eyes wide with terror. "Dad, I couldn't get far," he whispered, his breath hitching. They tried to take me back." Jake knelt beside him, eyes scanning the area. "I won't let them." But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at him. They had no plan, no idea what to do next, and the weight of impending dread pressed down that he grabbed Ethan's small hands, squeezing. "We have to find a safe place." But the night had transformed into an adversary. Trees whispered ominously, and every rustle felt like imminent doom. "Over there." Ethan pointed to a nearby alley, its mouth gaping like a dark throat. It led deeper into shadow, but, instinct told Jake, might also shield them from the ravenous specters. They dashed into the gloom, keeping their voices low, hearts racing, ears straining for any hint of pursuit. Inside the alley, a foul smell assaulted them like rotting despair mixed with something metallic. Jake's stomach churned, but he forced himself to focus. Ethan stayed close, glued to his side. The shadows shifted along the walls, flickering like dying embers, teasing them with distortions of what lay beyond. Suddenly, the echoes of laughter returned, bouncing off the damp walls. It felt like the shadows were toying with them, activating a primal fear that surged through Jake's veins. "Keep moving," he urged in a hoarse whisper, leading Ethan deeper into the blackened passage, but just as they rounded a bend, a sound halted them, a guttural growl emanating from the darkness ahead. Instinct kicked in. Jake pushed Ethan behind him, muscles tensing, ready to fight whatever emerged from the blackness. In that split second, the shadows loomed larger, molding into twisted shapes, the faces of despair morphing into grins that promised the merciless. "You can never escape," they hissed, voices layered, greedy, circling around them. Jake's heart thundered. There was no way out. The air felt thick with dread, and disbelief lurked behind him, a specter just waiting to consume them whole. The shadows approached, merging together, closing in from every side. What was his next move? Could he really fight back against the darkness, or would he have to relinquish his soul to save his son? The shadows danced around them, taunting, whispering names and places he wished he could forget. As they pressed in, Jake took a deep breath, knowing he had to make a choice, one that would determine the fate of both him and Ethan. In the grip of terror, one thought surged above the rest: could he face the consuming shadows and still shield his son from their curse? Or would that dreadful darkness swallow them all? The growl reverberated through the alley, sending a tremor down Jake's spine. The shadows closed in, their twisted forms swirling like smoke fused with malice. There was no time for fear now. He had to protect Ethan. "Stay behind me," Jake commanded, but his voice felt weak, swallowed by the darkness that loomed before them. The shadows pulsed with a life of their own, hungry for the warmth that beat in his chest. Jake glanced back at Ethan, his son's eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. It struck him, that fragile moment they were all each other had. If he faltered, they both would slip into that black abyss. "Now!" Jake shouted, gripping Ethan's hand. They bolted, sprinting down the alley, the guttural noises behind them swelling into a cacophony. The darkness chased, hot on their heels, like a pack of wolves eager for their prey. As they darted forward, something snagged Jake's leg, wrapping around him like a vine of ice. He stumbled, falling hard against the wet pavement. The air rushed out of him, leaving only desperation as he clutched at Ethan's hand, pulling him close. Run! Ethan hesitated for a brief moment, torn between instinct and loyalty. But the terror in his father's eyes pushed him forward. He dashed ahead, the shadows reaching for him, their whispers morphing into pleas, seducing him with words meant to entrap. "Ethan, my boy," they crooned, "stay with us, no. Don't listen." Jake wheezed, struggling against the grip that seemed to tighten around him. He could feel the shadows crawling up his back, creeping over his shoulders, a cold that seeped into his bones. There wasn't much time left. With a surge of adrenaline, Jake freed himself, rolling to his feet. He chased after Ethan, whose small figure was nearly lost in the thickening darkness. The alley twisted, branches of shadow branching out from the walls, eager to reach them. "Dad!" Ethan's voice cracked, echoing off the alley walls, a fragile thread tethering Jake to his son. Jake's heart pounded, fear pounding like a drum in his ears, grounding him with urgency. Jake turned again. Now he was the one who had to keep the shadows at bay. "Trust me, Ethan." He rushed forward, urging his son on. "Keep going. I'll find you." The boy nodded, tears glistening like tiny stars in his eyes, and sprinted deeper into the unknown. Jake felt a pang of guilt and dread as he watched Ethan run into the engulfing blackness, the shadows taunting, twisting the boy's path into chaos. Each second felt million times heavier as Jake fought to stay close, lungs burning with every breath. Suddenly, something changed. The atmosphere buzzed with a charged potential, as shadows twisted into forms that began to solidify, taking on recognizable features, the faces of people Jake used to know, contorted into expressions of agony and regret. They reached out, their mouths moving soundlessly, desperate to share their dark knowledge. "Dad! Help!" Ethan's voice shattered Jake's reverie. "Ethan! I'm coming!" he yelled, racing forward, his heart in his throat. The shadows wove around him, slick and serpentine, but he couldn't allow them to grasp him. He broke into a clearing, the alley stretching into a wide, open space filled with a sickly fog. The diner loomed larger ahead, its windows flickering with a sinister light, inviting yet repulsive. Jake hesitated. Could he lead Ethan into the very place of their nightmare? "Dad, please!" Ethan shouted again, fear rising into a crescendo that pierced through the chants of the shadows. The decision weighed heavily. What lies could the diner spin? What sacrifices would it demand? Before Jake could rationalize any further, something tugged at his ankle, a dark force, frigid like ice, pulling him down. Panic surged within him as he reached out to grab Ethan, but the shadows erupted around them, swirling with an unwanted hunger. "Go!" Jake screamed, using what felt like the last reserve of his strength. "Run to the diner. I'll hold them off." Ethan's eyes widened, the boy torn between loyalty and his own survival. At that moment, the shadows surged, enveloping Jake in a suffocating embrace, drowning out all sound, drawing him toward the dark grip of despair. In that swirling darkness, Jake wondered if he had made the right call. Was this the end, or was there a way to save them both? Suddenly, the shadows lifted, and he found himself staring into the diner's windows, the faces within indistinct yet filled with an unbearable longing. As the darkness wrapped around him, he couldn't help but question, would he become one of them, a cautionary tale ensnared in sin? And just as he felt the world fade, he heard Ethan's voice pierce the veil, determined, defiant, unwilling to let the shadows win. "Dad! I'll come back for you." The words echoed in the depths of Jake's mind as he fell further into the abyss, surrounded by a chilling certainty that this nightmare was only just beginning. But what if, in the heart of that haunted diner, lay the answer to their escape? And what darkness was Ethan willing to face to make that hope a reality? Jake's world spun as the shadows embraced him deeper, an insatiable force clawing at his very essence. The air felt viscous, thick and bitter, drowning him in despair, while Ethan's defiant shout rang in his ears. His son was out there, brave, innocent, possibly unaware of how close danger lingered. The diner's walls disintegrated around him, folding in on themselves like the pages of a cursed storybook. "Ethan!" He screamed, voice lost in the tumult of clawing darkness. Fear rippled through his veins as he fought against the shadows trying to bind him in their corrupt embrace. He pushed back with the strength of a father's desperation. "I want to let this place take us." But darkness laughed, a cackling sound that reverberated through the cracked linoleum, echoing memories of fear, pain, and sacrifice. The shadows shifted, forming glimpses of faces lost, patrons forever entrapped. They twisted in agony, reaching out with wretched hands. "Join us," they chanted, the words slithering through the air like a snake ready to strike. In a surge of clarity, Jake recalled the stories Crispin had told about the sacrifices, the diners long past the point of revival, fueling an insatiable hunger. "This ends now," he roared, heart pounding, as he felt raw determination spill forth to battle the tide. In the harsh silence that followed, the shadows flickered, wavering momentarily. Now was his chance. Wind surged around him, pushing. Jake lunged, bursting through the street entrance with a cry. The night chill embraced him, reviving sensations of hope and purpose. The diner's malevolent shadows hunched in the doorway, claws scratching at his heels. Then he saw Ethan, small and shimmering like a beacon against the relentless darkness. There, mere feet away, was his son crouched, shaking, but definitely there. "Ethan!" Jake shouted again, rushing forward. The shadows howled, tightening their grip on Jake's legs, attempting to drag him back. But he wouldn't let them take him. "Dad, help! They're everywhere." Ethan's voice trembled, but the plea sparked a fire of resolve within Jake. "I'm here. Hold on," he called, fighting against the darkness, pushing through the tendrils that scratched at him, gripping harder. Each step towards Ethan felt like wading through treacle, but he pushed harder, adrenaline surging through his body, willing his feet to move faster. "Keep moving," he shouted to his son, who was staring back in terror, eyes wide. Jake could see the shadows pointing at Ethan, their rage seething. Ethan shook his head, tears spilling on cheeks that were pale with fear. "I can't. They'll take me." Rage bubbled within Jake, raw and fierce. "They can't take you. You're stronger than they are. I believe in you." Jake's words cut through the air with conviction. "You need to trust me. We fight together." With sudden resolve, Ethan nodded and leaped into action, running towards the barrier of shadows while Jake threw himself in front. The shadows recoiled momentarily, confused by their unity, giving Jake the opening he desperately needed. "Now! We have to run!" Jake yelled, grabbing Ethan's hand firmly. Together, they charged toward the nearest entrance, a side door that stood ajar, light spilling through like a siren to lost sailors. They sprinted forward, hearts thundering, urgency pushing them through. Jake could feel the cold breath of shadows reaching for them, but determination blazed. "Keep running. Just a bit further," he urged, their feet pounding against the ground, breaths caught in a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The door loomed larger, promising warmth and safety. Suddenly, the shadows surged back. They were fast, predatory. "You will not escape," they snarled, anger shimmering in their misty forms. But as they closed in, something shifted within Jake. The memories of the diner whispered secret plans of courage and reclamation. "We are gonna escape," he declared, a fierce grimace contorting his face. He and Ethan burst through the door, and when they entered, a blinding light spilled over them, illuminating their very souls. A long hallway lay ahead, flanked by ghostly figures that whispered urgent warnings, but they weren't menacing, they were calling them further on. "Go!" Jake shouted, pulling Ethan with him. Shadows hissed behind, clawing, but they wouldn't deter him, and they didn't. At the end of the hallway was an exit, bright and alive. Their feet pounded hard against the floor as they dashed forward, shadows tightening the distance, but the light beckoned. "Almost there!" Jake yelled, squeezing Ethan's hand tighter. The shadows screamed their fury, hate lacing their voices in endless rebuke, but Jake remained fixed on their goal. They were almost there. With one final surge of energy, they dove through the door together, needles of light piercing through the darkness. They tumbled out onto the wet grass of the diner's parking lot, the ominous diner looming behind them, shadows fleeing as they crossed the threshold, but in that moment, a crashing sound echoed, the diner began pulling inward, collapsing upon itself, a hungry beast devouring its own. Jake held Ethan tightly, gasping for breath as the ground shook and the last remnants of the curse dissolved into the air. "We did it. We got away." Ethan blinked at his father, wide-eyed but alive, a flicker of a smile breaking through the earlier horror. "You saved me, Dad." Jake pulled Ethan close, squeezing him like he was precious. "I will always save you," he promised, heart swelling with relief. "No matter the cost." The wreckage of the cursed diner faded into the night, leaving only the echoes behind, music of a past now buried, a memory lost to the winds. As they stood together under the open sky, Jake knew life wouldn't go back to normal, but they shared a bond that had grown anew through fire and shadow. As they returned home, where safety waited, they knew they emerged stronger, together, father and son, through the storm, and into the light. Now that you've paused for this exhilarating ending, I need to ask you something urgent. You need to subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss any of the next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm, it seriously makes a difference. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories on this wild conclusion. And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Your support means everything.